In the heart of Los Angeles, under the bright lights of a bustling studio, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in the green room. The air buzzed with excitement as crew members rushed around, preparing for one of the most anticipated episodes of a popular late-night talk show. Known for his calm demeanor and unassuming nature, Keanu was there to promote his latest project, a highly anticipated sequel in the John Wick franchise. But little did anyone know, this appearance would soon become far more memorable than anyone had imagined. The host of the show was a rising star in the entertainment world, someone who had made waves with their sharp wit and outspoken views on social justice. Their reputation was built on calling out celebrities who they felt weren't doing enough to address societal issues. They often used their platform to challenge guests live on air, sometimes leaving them flustered or defensive. It wasn't uncommon for these confrontations to go viral, sparking heated debates across social media platforms. As Keanu waited, scrolling absent-mindedly through his phone, whispers filled the hallway outside the green room. People were talking about what might happen during the interview. "Did you hear he's going after Keanu tonight?" one crew member murmured to another. "They're saying he's got some tough questions lined up." Keanu overheard fragments of the conversation but didn't react. Instead, he simply continued sitting there, dressed casually in a black leather jacket and jeans, looking every bit like the action hero fans adored. To those around him, he seemed unfazed by the chatter. His calmness was almost magnetic. It drew people in without demanding attention. That quiet confidence was part of what made Keanu so beloved. He wasn't flashy or loud, yet he commanded respect effortlessly. Backstage, the host paced nervously, rehearsing lines under their breath. They knew Keanu wasn't just any guest. Unlike many Hollywood stars, Keanu had earned a reputation not only for his acting chops, but also for being genuinely kind and humble. Stories of his generosity were legendary. How he once gave away millions from his Matrix earnings to special effects teams, how he spent hours comforting grieving strangers at gas stations, how he lived modestly despite his wealth. These anecdotes painted him as someone untouchable, immune to criticism because of his authenticity. But the host believed otherwise. In their mind, even someone like Keanu Reeves couldn't escape scrutiny. After all, fame came with responsibility, didn't it? And if you had millions of followers hanging onto your every word, shouldn't you use that influence wisely? The host had prepared a list of pointed questions designed to push Keanu into defending himself, or better yet, admitting fault. Meanwhile, Keanu remained oblivious to the brewing storm. As the minutes ticked closer to showtime, he sipped water slowly, lost in thought. Perhaps he was reflecting on his journey, the highs and lows, the tragedies and triumphs that had shaped him into the man he was today. Or maybe he was mentally running through the key points he wanted to share about his new movie. Whatever it was, his expression betrayed nothing. If anything, he appeared relaxed, almost serene. When the stage manager signaled that it was time to head out, Keanu stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward the set with his characteristic ease. Backstage, the energy shifted palpably. Crew members exchanged glances, sensing that something big was about to unfold. The host took their place behind the desk, adjusting their microphone while flashing a practiced smile for the camera. As the theme music played and the audience erupted into applause, Keanu stepped onto the stage, waving warmly at the cheering crowd. He shook hands with the host, exchanging pleasantries before settling into the guest chair. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal. The host complimented Keanu on his work, praising his iconic performances and expressing admiration for his dedication to his craft. Keanu smiled graciously, thanking them for having him on the show. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The host's initial charm masked an underlying agenda, one that would soon come to light. Little did Keanu know he was about to face a verbal gauntlet unlike anything he'd encountered before. Yet, true to form, he carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had endeared him to millions worldwide. Whether he realized it or not, the next few minutes would test not only his patience, but also his ability to navigate a potentially explosive situation with grace and wisdom. And so, as the cameras rolled and the spotlight shone brightly, the stage was set for an unforgettable encounter, one that would leave audiences talking long after the credits rolled. The interview began innocently enough, with the host steering the conversation toward Keanu's latest film. They praised his performance in John Wick, calling it a masterclass in action cinema, and joking about how he'd become synonymous with coolness itself. The audience laughed at the light-hearted banter, clearly enjoying the exchange. For a moment, it seemed like this would be just another friendly chat, a chance for fans to see their favorite actor up close and personal. But then the tone shifted. After a few more compliments, the host leaned forward slightly, adopting a more serious expression. "Keanu," they began, their voice taking on a sharper edge. "You've been in Hollywood for decades now, and you're one of the most recognizable faces in the world. But let me ask you something. Why haven't we seen you speak out more on some of the biggest issues facing our society today?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. The studio grew quieter, as if everyone collectively held their breath. Keanu tilted his head slightly, studying the host with an unreadable expression. His calm demeanor didn't waver, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, as though he were trying to understand where this line of questioning was headed. The host pressed on, undeterred by the silence. "I mean, look at all these movements happening right now: climate change, racial justice, gender equality. People are demanding accountability from those in positions of power. And yet," they paused dramatically, letting the implication sink in before continuing, "you don't seem to have taken a public stand on any of them. Why is that?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged puzzled glances. It wasn't uncommon for celebrities to face questions about their activism, or lack thereof. But this felt different. There was an accusatory undertone to the host's words, as if they were implying that Keanu had somehow failed in his duty as a public figure. Keanu didn't respond immediately. He sat still, his hands resting gently on his lap, his gaze steady. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "That's a fair question," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "And I appreciate you bringing it up because it gives me a chance to share my perspective." The host raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such a composed reaction. They must have anticipated resistance or defensiveness, perhaps even a hint of irritation. But Keanu's calm response threw them off balance, forcing them to recalibrate their approach. "Well," the host replied, attempting to regain control of the narrative, "it's not just about sharing perspectives, is it? It's about using your platform to make real change. A lot of people feel that celebrities who stay silent are part of the problem." Keanu listened intently, his expression never wavering. He seemed to be absorbing every word, processing the weight of the accusation. Then, with a slight nod, he said, "I hear what you're saying, and I agree that platforms come with responsibility. But I also believe that change starts with understanding, not judgment." The host frowned, clearly unprepared for this kind of answer. They had expected pushback, maybe even denial. Instead, Keanu was offering a philosophical counterpoint, one that challenged the very premise of their argument. Sensing an opportunity to steer the conversation back to their original intent, the host doubled down. "So are you saying that staying silent is a form of understanding?" they asked, their tone dripping with skepticism. "Because to a lot of people, silence looks a lot like indifference." Keanu exhaled slowly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Silence doesn't always mean indifference," he replied. "Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it means learning. And sometimes it means doing work quietly without needing recognition." The audience stirred again, this time with murmurs of approval. Keanu's words resonated deeply, striking a chord with anyone who had ever felt misunderstood or unfairly judged. His calm delivery carried a quiet authority, making it impossible to dismiss his points as mere excuses. Frustrated by the growing support for Keanu, the host tried a different tactic. "Okay, but let's talk specifics," they said, leaning forward aggressively. "What exactly have you done behind the scenes, as you put it? Because actions matter more than intentions." For the first time, Keanu allowed himself a small chuckle. It wasn't mocking or condescending, it was warm and genuine, the kind of laugh that made people feel at ease. "Fair enough," he said, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Let me give you an example. Years ago, when I worked on The Matrix, and I gave away most of my earnings to the special effects team, they were the ones who brought that world to life, and I wanted to acknowledge their hard work." The revelation drew gasps from the audience. Even the host looked momentarily stunned, though they quickly masked their surprise with a tight smile. "That's commendable," they admitted grudgingly. "But that was years ago. What about now? What are you doing today to address the urgent issues we're facing?" Keanu nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "Today," he said, his voice firm but gentle, "I focus on supporting organizations that align with causes I care about. Whether it's helping children in need or protecting the environment, I try to contribute in ways that make a tangible difference, but here's the thing. I don't do it for applause. Real change isn't about headlines or hashtags. It's about consistency and commitment." The host opened their mouth to interject, but Keanu continued, his tone unwavering. "And honestly, I think we need to be careful about reducing activism to performative gestures. If someone plants a tree but posts about it online, does that make the act less meaningful? Maybe not. But if planting trees becomes secondary to getting likes, then we've lost sight of what truly matters." By now the audience was fully engaged, hanging on to every word. Applause broke out sporadically, only to be shushed by others eager to hear more. The host, however, looked increasingly flustered. Their rehearsed lines and prepared arguments were crumbling under the weight of Keanu's thoughtful responses. Desperate to regain the upper hand, they fired off another pointed question. "Are you saying that people shouldn't call out hypocrisy when they see it? Isn't accountability important?" Keanu met their gaze directly, his brown eyes filled with quiet resolve. "Absolutely. Accountability is crucial," he agreed. "But so is compassion. Shaming people into action rarely works. What does work is inspiring them, showing them that change is possible, and that they have a role to play in creating a better future." The host hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. They had walked into this interview confident in their ability to expose Keanu's perceived shortcomings, but instead, they found themselves facing a man whose wisdom and authenticity were impossible to dismantle. The longer the conversation went on, the clearer it became that Keanu wasn't just defending himself. He was offering a lesson in humility, empathy, and the true meaning of leadership. As the segment neared its end, the atmosphere in the studio had transformed completely. What had started as a potential confrontation had turned into a profound dialogue, one that left both the live audience and viewers at home reflecting on their own beliefs and biases. And while the host may have intended to challenge Keanu, they inadvertently gave him a platform to shine brighter than ever before. When the commercial break finally arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. The host retreated behind their desk, visibly rattled, while Keanu remained composed, smiling warmly at the cheering crowd. Little did anyone know the real impact of this interview was only beginning to unfold. As the cameras cut to commercial, the energy in the studio shifted dramatically. The audience was buzzing, their excitement palpable as they exchanged wide-eyed glances and whispered animatedly about what had just unfolded. Keanu Reeves sat calmly in his chair, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if he were simply waiting for the next question without a care in the world. Meanwhile, the host fidgeted nervously behind the desk, flipping through their notes with an air of unease. It was clear that the interview wasn't going according to plan. When the show returned from break, the host attempted to regain control of the conversation. They forced a smile, trying to appear composed, but there was a noticeable tension in their voice. "Let's dive back in," they said, leaning forward slightly. "You mentioned earlier that real change starts with understanding, not judgment. That sounds nice in theory, but how does that translate into action? Isn't it easier to say than to do?" Keanu nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. He seemed to weigh each word carefully before responding, as though ensuring his answer would resonate deeply. "It's true. It's not always easy," he admitted. But I think the first step is recognizing that everyone comes from a different place. Some people are ready to lead marches and organize protests, while others might contribute in quieter ways. Neither approach is inherently better or worse. They're just different. The host interrupted, their tone sharpening. But doesn't visibility matter? If no one sees what you're doing, how can it inspire others to act? Keanu tilted his head, considering the question. Visibility has its place, he agreed. There's no denying that public figures have a unique opportunity to amplify important messages. But I also believe that inspiration doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it's the small, consistent actions, the ones that go unnoticed, that create lasting impact. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. Think about it this way. When you see someone giving a big speech at a rally, it might motivate you to take action right then and there. But when you hear about someone quietly dedicating years of their life to helping others, without seeking attention, it plants a seed. It reminds you that change isn't just about moments, it's about persistence. The audience erupted into applause, clearly moved by Keanu's perspective. The host, however, looked increasingly frustrated. Their attempts to paint Keanu as indifferent or complacent were backfiring spectacularly. Every accusation they threw his way seemed to bounce off him like water on glass, only highlighting his grace under pressure. Determined to push further, the host changed tactics. "All right, let's talk about privilege," they said, their tone pointed. "You've had immense success in your career and you're seen as this universally admired figure. Doesn't that give you even more of a responsibility to use your platform loudly and unapologetically?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, privilege comes with responsibility," he replied firmly, "and I don't shy away from that. But I think we need to be mindful of how we define using a platform. For some, it means speaking out publicly. For me, it means supporting causes in ways that align with my values, even if those efforts aren't visible to the public." He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and sincere. "Here's the thing. I've learned over the years that true leadership isn't about telling people what to think or do. It's about creating spaces where people feel empowered to find their own path. Whether that's through mentorship, financial support, or simply listening, every contribution matters." The host opened their mouth to respond, but Keanu continued, his tone softening yet remaining resolute. "I'll tell you something else," he added. "A lot of the work I've done and continue to do isn't glamorous. It doesn't make headlines and it won't win me any awards, but that's okay, because it's not about me. It's about the people who benefit from it." The audience broke into spontaneous applause again, their admiration for Keanu growing with every passing moment. The host, on the other hand, seemed to shrink slightly in their chair. Their rehearsed questions and sharp criticisms were losing their edge against Keanu's unwavering authenticity. Sensing that they were losing ground, the host made one last attempt to challenge him. "So, are you saying that celebrities shouldn't be held accountable for their choices?" they asked, their voice tinged with desperation. "Because a lot of people would argue that silence is complicity." Keanu took a deep breath, his gaze steady and piercing. "Accountability is important," he said, choosing his words deliberately. "But accountability shouldn't be confused with punishment. If someone genuinely wants to make a difference, wouldn't it be better to encourage them rather than tear them down?" The host faltered, their confidence visibly wavering. They tried to interject, but Keanu pressed on, his voice carrying a quiet authority that commanded attention. "Look, I understand why people get frustrated. We live in a world where problems feel overwhelming and it's natural to want quick solutions. But progress takes time, and it requires all of us working together, not pointing fingers." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Then with a slight smile, he added, "Besides, I think most people are doing the best they can with what they have. Instead of focusing on what they're not doing, maybe we should celebrate the good they are doing and encourage them to keep going." The audience erupted once more, this time with cheers and whistles filling the studio. Even some members of the production crew could be seen clapping enthusiastically from the sidelines. The host, however, was left speechless. Their attempts to provoke Keanu had not only failed, but had inadvertently showcased his wisdom and humility in a way that resonated deeply with everyone watching. As the segment drew to a close, the host managed to muster a strained smile and thank Keanu for sharing his thoughts. But it was clear that the dynamic had shifted entirely. What had started as an interrogation had transformed into a masterclass in empathy and introspection, leaving the audience inspired and the host struggling to salvage their credibility. When the cameras finally cut away, the applause lingered, echoing through the studio long after the interview ended. Keanu stood up, shaking hands with the host politely before walking off stage. His demeanor remained calm and gracious, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet, for everyone else, it was undeniable. Something remarkable had transpired. A reminder that kindness, humility, and genuine conviction could shine brightest in the face of adversity. As the interview entered its final stretch, the tension in the studio was almost electric. The host, visibly flustered but unwilling to concede defeat, tried one last gambit to regain control of the conversation. They leaned forward, their expression a mix of determination and thinly veiled frustration. "Let me ask you this," they began, their voice sharper than before. "If everyone adopted your philosophy, focusing on quiet actions instead of public advocacy, wouldn't that leave a void? Who would step up to hold institutions accountable or push for systemic change?" Keanu didn't respond immediately. He took a moment to consider the question, his brow furrowing slightly as if weighing the implications of every word. Then, with a calmness that bordered on serene, he said, "That's an interesting point, and I think it's worth exploring. But let's be honest, systemic change doesn't happen because one person steps up. It happens when many people work together, each contributing in their own way." The host raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "But how does that collaboration happen if no one is willing to take the lead publicly? Someone has to start the conversation, right?" Keanu nodded, thoughtfully. "Of course, public advocacy plays a vital role, and there are incredible individuals out there doing just that, raising awareness, organizing movements, and demanding justice. My approach isn't meant to discredit what they do, it's simply different. Not everyone is built for the spotlight, and that's okay." He paused, letting the audience absorb his words. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "Think about it this way. Imagine a garden. Some plants grow tall and vibrant, catching everyone's attention. Others grow closer to the ground, quietly nourishing the soil or providing shade for smaller plants. Both are essential to the ecosystem, even though they serve different purposes." The analogy struck a chord with the audience, who erupted into applause once again. The host, however, looked increasingly uneasy. Their rehearsed arguments were crumbling under Keanu's thoughtful responses, which seemed to resonate more deeply with each passing moment. Desperate to steer the conversation back to their original narrative, the host fired off another pointed question. "But isn't there a risk in staying silent? People might assume you don't care, or worse, that you're avoiding controversy altogether." Keanu chuckled softly, not dismissively but warmly, as though amused by the irony of the accusation. "I can see why someone might think that," he admitted. "But silence doesn't always mean avoidance. Sometimes it means choosing your battles wisely. There's a difference between being silent and being strategic." The host frowned, clearly unprepared for this line of reasoning. "Strategic?" they echoed, their tone dripping with skepticism. "So, you're saying you pick and choose which issues to engage with based on what, exactly?" Keanu's eyes locked onto theirs, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Based on where I believe I can make the most meaningful impact," he replied. "Look, I'm not here to tell anyone how to live their life or what kind of activism is right. All I'm saying is that we all have unique strengths and opportunities. For some, that means leading protests or speaking at rallies. For me, it means supporting causes behind the scenes, mentoring young artists, or working with organizations that share my values." The host opened their mouth to interject, but Keanu continued, his voice carrying a quiet conviction that silenced any rebuttal. "And honestly, I think we need to stop viewing activism as a one-size-fits-all solution. If we truly want to create lasting change, we should celebrate diversity. not just in our communities but in our approaches to solving problems. The audience, now fully on Keanu's side, cheered loudly, their applause drowning out any attempt by the host to respond. Sensing the tide had turned irreversibly against them, the host attempted to lighten the mood with a joke. "Well, I guess you've given us a lot to think about," they said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to their own ears. Keanu smiled graciously, nodding in agreement. "That's all I hope for, to spark conversations that inspire reflection. At the end of the day, we're all learning, growing, and figuring things out together." With those parting words, the segment concluded. As the cameras cut away for the final commercial break, the studio buzzed with energy. Members of the audience turned to one another, animatedly discussing what they just witnessed. Social media was already lighting up with clips of the exchange, fans praising Keanu for his wisdom and composure, while criticizing the host for their aggressive tactics. Backstage, the atmosphere was equally charged. Crew members whispered excitedly about how the interview had unfolded, many expressing admiration for Keanu's ability to remain composed under pressure. Meanwhile, the host retreated to their dressing room, visibly shaken. It was clear that the confrontation hadn't gone as planned, and that the fallout would likely extend far beyond the confines of the studio. For Keanu, however, the experience seemed to barely register. After shaking hands with the production team and thanking them for having him on the show, he slipped out quietly, disappearing into the night as effortlessly as he had arrived. To him, the interview wasn't a victory or a spectacle. It was simply another opportunity to share his perspective, to plant seeds of understanding in a world often divided by judgment. Little did he know, the ripple effects of his words were only beginning to spread. Within hours, video clips of the exchange went viral, sparking heated debates across social media platforms. Supporters hailed Keanu as a voice of reason in an era dominated by performative activism, while critics accused the host of grandstanding and failing to grasp the nuances of genuine advocacy. By morning, hashtags like Keanu Reeves Wisdom and Real Change Not hashtags were trending worldwide, with countless users sharing stories of how Keanu's message had resonated with them. Even mainstream news outlets picked up the story, analyzing the incident as a cultural moment that highlighted the growing divide between authenticity and posturing in public discourse. Yet, despite the whirlwind of attention, Keanu remained characteristically low-key. When asked later about the interview, he shrugged it off with characteristic humility. "It was just a conversation," he said simply. "If it made people think or inspired them to act in their own way, then that's a good thing." And perhaps that was the true power of Keanu Reeves, not his fame, his talent, or even his kindness, but his ability to remind us of something fundamental, that real change begins not with shouting matches or finger-pointing, but with listening, understanding, and acting with purpose. In a world desperate for heroes, Keanu proved once again that sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest messages. The aftermath of the interview felt like a tidal wave crashing across the entertainment industry and beyond. Within minutes of the show airing, clips of Keanu's responses began circulating online, sparking immediate reactions from fans, critics, and casual viewers alike. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags such as Keanu Reeves Wisdom, Real Change Not Noise, and Class Act, as audiences around the world dissected every moment of the exchange. The overwhelming consensus? Keanu Reeves had delivered one of the most thoughtful and compelling defenses of humility and quiet activism in recent memory. For the host, however, the reaction was far less forgiving. Their attempt to challenge Keanu had backfired spectacularly, transforming what they likely intended as a provocative interview into an unflattering spotlight on their own approach. Critics pointed out that the host's aggressive tone and performative style came across as insincere, even hypocritical, especially when juxtaposed against Keanu's calm and genuine demeanor. Online forums buzzed with accusations that the host cared more about creating viral moments than fostering meaningful dialogue. Memes mocking their flustered expressions during the interview flooded Twitter and Instagram, while opinion pieces questioned whether their brand of woke commentary was doing more harm than good. In the days following the interview, late-night Talk shows and morning news programs dedicated segments to analyzing the fallout. Pundits debated whether the incident marked a turning point in how public figures are held accountable, or over-accountable, for their activism. Some argued that the host's line of questioning reflected a broader cultural trend, the tendency to weaponize social justice issues for personal gain or clout. Others praised Keanu for cutting through the noise and reminding people that real change requires patience, empathy, and consistent effort rather than flashy declarations. Meanwhile, the host faced mounting pressure both professionally and personally. Ratings for their show dipped noticeably after the episode aired, with many viewers expressing disappointment in the confrontational tone. A petition even surfaced online calling for the network to issue an apology to Keanu, though it ultimately fizzled out without much impact. Behind the scenes, sources close to the production reported that the host was feeling the weight of the backlash. They reportedly spent hours in meetings with executives, attempting to strategize ways to repair their image and salvage the show's reputation. On subsequent episodes, the host made subtle attempts to address the controversy. During one monologue, they joked about interviewing someone who turned the tables on me, drawing polite laughter from the audience but failing to fully diffuse the tension. In another segment, they invited a panel of activists to discuss the role of celebrities in social movements, a thinly veiled effort to position themselves as supportive of meaningful advocacy. Yet, despite these efforts, the shadow of the Keanu Reeves interview loomed large, casting doubt on their credibility and intentions. For Keanu, the situation couldn't have been more different. Despite the viral nature of the interview, he remained characteristically low-key, refusing to engage in any further drama or commentary. When reporters cornered him at red carpet events asking for his thoughts on the backlash against the host, he responded with his trademark grace. "I don't believe in holding grudges," he said with a small smile. "We all make mistakes, and I hope this opens the door for deeper conversations about how we can support each other instead of tearing each other down." His refusal to fan the flames of controversy only endeared him further to the public. Fans hailed him not just as an actor but as a moral compass, a rare figure in Hollywood who consistently prioritized kindness and authenticity over ego and spectacle. Stories of his past acts of generosity resurfaced, reinforcing the idea that his words during the interview weren't empty rhetoric, but reflections of a lifelong philosophy. One viral thread compiled anecdotes from crew members, co-stars, and even strangers who had encountered Keanu's kindness firsthand, painting a portrait of a man whose actions spoke louder than his words. As the weeks passed, the ripple effects of the interview continued to spread. Schools and community organizations began incorporating Keanu's garden analogy into discussions about teamwork and collaboration, using it as a teaching tool to emphasize the value of diverse contributions. Activists cited his remarks about quiet persistence as a reminder that not all heroes wear capes or seek the limelight. Even corporations took note, with several brands featuring quotes from the interview in their marketing campaigns, hoping to align themselves with the ideals Keanu represented. Perhaps most significantly, the incident sparked broader conversations about the nature of accountability and activism in the modern age. While some defended the host's right to ask tough questions, others argued that their approach missed the mark entirely. Articles and think pieces explored the fine line between calling out hypocrisy and perpetuating cynicism, urging readers to consider whether shaming individuals truly leads to progress or simply alienates potential allies. Keanu's emphasis on compassion over judgment resonated deeply, offering a counterpoint to the often harsh and polarizing discourse dominating headlines. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that the interview had left an indelible mark on popular culture. For the host, it served as a humbling lesson in the dangers of performative activism and the importance of approaching sensitive topics with sincerity and respect. For Keanu, it reinforced his status as a beloved icon whose influence extended far beyond the silver screen. And for the millions of people who watched or read about the exchange, it provided a timely reminder of the power of humility, empathy, and quiet determination in a world increasingly driven by noise and outrage. Yet, true to form, Keanu didn't linger on the accolades. As the hype faded, he quietly returned to his work, promoting his latest film, supporting charitable causes, and continuing to live his life with the same understated dignity that had earned him admiration in the first place. If anything, the interview proved that sometimes the simplest truths resonate the loudest, leaving an enduring legacy that transcends fleeting trends or controversies. In the weeks and months that followed the now infamous interview, the cultural landscape continued to shift in ways no one could have predicted. The conversation sparked by Keanu Reeves wasn't just a fleeting moment of viral fame. It became a catalyst for deeper reflection on how society approaches activism, accountability, and authenticity. For many, the exchange served as a mirror, forcing them to examine their own beliefs and behaviors, and whether they were contributing to meaningful progress or merely perpetuating performative gestures. Keanu himself remained largely removed from the ongoing discourse. True to his nature, he avoided interviews where the topic might come up, steering clear of any attempts to capitalize on the incident. Instead, he focused on what he did best, working behind the scenes to support causes close to his heart. Whether it was funding scholarships for underprivileged students, donating resources to environmental organizations, or mentoring young filmmakers, Keanu's actions spoke louder than ever before. His steadfast commitment to leading by example inspired countless others to rethink their own roles in creating change. The host, meanwhile, faced a reckoning that extended far beyond the initial backlash. Their show struggled to regain its footing, with ratings remaining sluggish despite their efforts to pivot toward more positive and constructive content. Critics argued that audiences had lost trust in the host's intentions, viewing them as someone more interested in stirring controversy than fostering genuine dialogue. In an attempt to rebuild their reputation, the host embarked on a series of public appearances aimed at addressing the criticism head-on. During these events, they acknowledged missteps in their approach during the Keanu interview, admitting that they may have prioritized sensationalism over substance. "I've learned a lot from this experience," the host said during one particularly candid moment at a press conference. "It's easy to get caught up in the idea of holding people accountable without considering the impact of your words, or whether you're coming from a place of understanding yourself. I'm grateful for the feedback because it's pushed me to grow." While some dismissed these statements as damage control, others saw them as a step toward redemption. Slowly but surely, the host began rebuilding their career, focusing on amplifying marginalized voices and highlighting grassroots movements rather than targeting celebrities. Though skepticism lingered among certain segments of the audience, there was a sense that the incident had forced them to reevaluate their priorities and, perhaps, emerge wiser for it. For the broader public, the legacy of the interview lived on in unexpected ways. Schools incorporated discussions about the event into curriculums, using it as a case study in media literacy and ethical communication. Teachers encouraged students to analyze the dynamics between Keanu and the host, asking questions like, what makes someone's message resonate? How can we challenge ideas without resorting to hostility? And most importantly, how do we balance accountability with compassion? Activist groups also drew inspiration from Keanu's emphasis on quiet persistence. Many began shifting their strategies away from high-profile campaigns designed solely for visibility, instead focusing on long-term initiatives rooted in community engagement. Leaders within these organizations credited Keanu's words with helping them realize that true advocacy isn't always loud. It's often steady, patient, and unrelenting. Even Hollywood took note. Celebrities who had previously shied away from discussing social issues publicly started speaking out more thoughtfully, emphasizing the importance of action over optics. Some even cited Keanu as a role model, praising his ability to navigate complex conversations with grace and wisdom. A new wave of influencers emerged, individuals committed to using their platforms not for self-promotion, but for amplifying lesser-heard voices and driving tangible change. As time went on, the story of the interview became less about the clash itself and more about the lessons it imparted. Documentaries and podcasts explored its themes, unpacking the nuances of modern activism and the challenges of navigating cancel culture. One particularly popular docuseries titled Beyond the Spotlight featured interviews with activists, psychologists, and cultural critics, all weighing in on how moments like Keanu's exchange with the host shape societal norms and expectations. Through it all, Keanu remained a beacon of humility and integrity. He never sought to position himself as a spokesperson for any movement, nor did he allow the praise to inflate his ego. When asked in rare interviews about the enduring impact of the incident, he responded with characteristic modesty. "I don't think I did anything special," he said with a shrug. "I just shared my perspective the way anyone would if given the chance. If it helped people reflect or feel inspired, then that's wonderful. But the real heroes are the ones doing the hard work every day, often without recognition." This sentiment resonated deeply with fans who continued to celebrate Keanu, not only as an actor but as a symbol of quiet strength and moral clarity. Fan art depicting him as everything from a wise sage to a modern-day superhero flooded social media, accompanied by heartfelt messages thanking him for reminding people of the value of kindness and perseverance. Even years later, memes referencing his garden analogy remained staples in online communities, serving as gentle reminders of the importance of diverse contributions to collective progress. Ultimately, the interview transcended its original context, becoming a touchstone for discussions about empathy, leadership, and the power of authenticity. It challenged people to reconsider what it means to be an advocate, not just in terms of grand gestures, but in the small, everyday choices that add up to something greater. And while the host eventually found their footing again, the incident left an indelible mark on their approach, shaping them into a more mindful and reflective interviewer. As for Keanu, life carried on much as it always had. He continued making movies, supporting charitable causes, and living simply, untouched by the chaos he had inadvertently ignited. Yet his influence lingered everywhere, in classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms across the globe. People remembered not just his words, but the calm conviction with which he delivered them. In a world often divided by noise and judgment, Keanu Reeves stood as a testament to the enduring power of humility, patience, and unwavering sincerity. And so, the story came full circle, not with fanfare or spectacle, but with quiet resolve. Keanu's response to the host hadn't just surprised everyone. It had reminded them of something profound: that real change begins not with shouting matches or viral sound bites, but with listening, learning, and acting with purpose. In doing so, he proved once again that sometimes the simplest truths carry the deepest resonance, leaving behind a legacy far greater than any headline could capture.